Hello and welcome to Alex's Model Kits. It's been a while, hasn't it? I think the last video I made was October last year, which is about 9 months ago. So sorry about that. The main reason for that is that I changed jobs. The new job is very good indeed, and part of that means that I work from home. So in fact, just over there that's my office. But the downside to that is that whilst the commute to work is a dream, it means that you never really leave work. And in the evenings when I would want to come up here and sit here and do models, sometimes I end up sitting over there and doing bits of work that I wanted to get done. Anyhow, I'm finding a balance in my life between work and modelling, and so I'm back here a bit more in recent months. So the last video I made, I was talking about a Spitfire and a Hampden I. Both those kits are now completed, and probably the best thing to do, I guess, would be to have a look at them. So let's look at the Hampden first, I think. When I last talked about the Hampden, I discovered that I had a part missing. One of the 4 wheel hubs was absent without leave. I decided I would have a go at building the replacement part with some spare plasticard. While the end result might be a little rustic, I think that when it's installed on the plane it becomes less obvious. Here is a supplied wheel hub, and here's a scratch-built version. Once the construction had been completed, I then finished the kit off with Humbrol enamel paints. Airfix first released their Hampden kit in 1968. And the kit did throw a few fit issues at me from time to time. But once I'd worked my way through them, the rest of the kit came together nicely. I decided not to weather this kit, as I liked the look of the kit as it was. All the glasswork was fixed in place using cheap PVA glue. This does an excellent job of providing a strong bond without fogging any clear parts. Plus, any surplus glue dries clear. So there we are, that's the Hampden completed. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm fairly happy with the kit. I think for the age of the kit, I'm quite pleased with how it looked eventually. There were a few issues here and there, but nothing too serious. And yeah, generally I'm quite happy with it. I think it's a good representation of the aircraft. So the next thing to do is to look at the Spitfire. So here we go. When I last talked about this kit, I had completed the building of the cockpit and decided to add the pilot figure. The figure was painted and then added to the cockpit. I decided that this was going to be a depiction of a plane returning from combat and having just landed. The 2 fuselage halves are then glued together, followed by the wing assembly. I had a fairly serious fit issue with the wings attaching to the fuselage. The gap created for the wings to fit into is made of 2 angles, which should in theory make it almost impossible to incorrectly fit the wings to the fuselage. However, there is simply no way to get the wings to fit neatly into the area created for them, and there were some fairly serious and obvious gaps from almost every angle. The only solution was to resort to brute force. I used ample amounts of glue on every surface, gluing one side first to fit, leaving it to dry, and then gluing the opposite side a day later and holding it tightly in place for about 30 minutes to give the glue plenty of time to dry. When both sides were glued in place, I waited another 24 hours and then glued the front and back to give some additional strength to the overall area. Once the aircraft had been constructed, I then turned my attention to painting and weathering. I wanted this to be a well-used Spitfire, something that reflected being scrambled 4 or 5 times a day, and so I thought there should be a reasonable amount of chipped paint, particularly around the panels that would be removed regularly, the engine panels, plus the gun bays and the panel for the radio. My approach to chipping was to paint those areas aluminium, and then dab small blobs of Humbrol's Mascal onto those areas. Then, once the maskell had dried, paint the aircraft in its camouflage colours. Once the paint had dried, I then used some white tack to peel away the maskell, revealing the aluminium under the camouflage paint. This technique is used by many modellers with great success, but in this instance it didn't really work out for me, possibly because I paint with a paintbrush and not an airbrush. What I found was that the layer of paint that I'd laid down for the top camouflage colour was so thick that when the maskell was peeled away, it left more of a crater than the intended missing flecks of paint. So I will experiment with this technique again in the future. One possible option might be to thin down the paint before applying it and apply several thin shades. I then finished off the weathering using the same technique I'd used for weathering the Millennium Falcon, oil paint. I was pleased with the effect I got from the Millennium Falcon, but less happy with the end result of the Spitfire. On the upper surface I think it looks okay. On the underside I think it's overdone. I probably should have used less oils on the underside. So there we are, that's the Spitfire done. I'm a little less happy with it. For a couple of reasons really. I was surprised at the fit issues that I had. I can't quite see how I managed to get that wrong on the construction side. And I'd be surprised if it was a trait of the kit itself. So I don't quite understand where that came from. But having worked around it, having got things in place, I was quite pleased with the overall finish of the kit, up until the point where I painted it and weathered it. And as you can see from the film, the technique for doing paint chips was not very successful. That's down to me, that's nothing to do with the kit, that's just purely my own inability. I'll have to experiment a bit more with that technique. I know other people use it on a regular basis with great success, so that's nothing to do with the technique, it's down to how I've applied it. And one option is to thin the paint down and to try and get a thinner covering over that, over the chipped areas. The concern I've got about thinning the paint too much is that if I'm masking areas off, then you'll definitely get a lot of bleed coming through the paint under the masking tape. So I need to be careful with that. I'll have to experiment a little bit and see how that works out. I also think that the weathering on the underside using the oils was pretty ham-fisted, really. It was pretty ugly, and I think that that is a lesson I need to think about. It's much easier to build things up gradually than it is to slap everything on in one go and then start to mess around with it. And probably what I should have done was I should have been a bit more reticent in what I actually put on initially, and then gradually built things up. So that's a lesson to learn as well, and I shall try and do that next time round. So in the meantime, what is next? Well, I have a kit lined up, which is this kit here, which I'm looking forward to doing. That looks very good indeed, actually. I've had a look inside. It looks very good. Looking forward to doing that. And I will do a video on that very soon, I hope. I'm also working on a couple of other kits, which is unusual for me. I tend to try and just do one or maybe two kits at a time. I don't really like having lots of kits on the go, mainly because I'm so slow at doing everything. But in this case, I've got two other kits going on at the moment. One is a short Sterling, and I've run into a problem with that, which I'll talk about in its own video. And the other is kind of related to the Sterling, which is the Airfix RAF Bomber Command Supply Kit, which looks very nice. And again, I will do a video about that, hopefully fairly soon. A few months ago, Land Rover, as you know, I quite like Land Rovers. Some of you know anyway, I quite like Land Rovers. and a few months ago Land Rover had their last Land Rover Defender roll off the assembly line at Solihull, and I felt the best way of marking that occasion was to make a Land Rover, and I had a very small Land Rover kit stored away, and so I decided to sit down. The plan was to do it over a weekend. As it turned out, I think it took me about 4 weekends. I don't know why I take so long to get these kits done. The Land Rover, that particular kit, should have been nothing. It should have just been thrown together in a weekend and been done. But somehow I just seem to make things last. I think sometimes possibly I engage less in model making and more in some sort of odd form of styrene based Tai Chi, really. That's all I can account for, really. So yeah, so that kit was done after 4 weekends, and I was quite pleased with it generally, and I will show some shots now for you. So this kit from Airfix is fairly straightforward. Just 45 pieces and 10 steps go to make the kit. 6 of those steps deal with the Land Rover, the remaining 4 deal with the trailer. When the kit's completed, I weathered it using the same oil paint technique that I used for the Spitfire. So there we are, that's that kit sorted out, and as I said, I'm in a very small kit. There's not much to say about it, but generally I was quite happy with it, and it's quite a nice way, I think, of marking what for me is one of those automotive events, sort of the last Defender rolling off the production line at Solihull, and I look forward to the next version coming out, whenever that may be. So I think that's about it, really. I think I've been going on for quite long enough, and I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found the modelling interesting. Sorry for taking such a long time to give you an update. Thank you for your patience, and hopefully I will be a bit more regular in future with updates to come. So there we are. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.